Fantastic. All right, I'm just going to jump right in because we have so much to cover today, and here we go. So I am Lindsay Johnson. Thank you for joining. Thank you for tuning in for today's panel called The Road to Allyship. We will talk about how to facilitate equitable communication and steer difficult conversations by embracing the discomfort when discussing race. You will hear from 4 changemakers in the diversity, equity, and inclusion space. They will share their experiences and offer techniques on how to develop culture built on trust and cooperation. And before we dive into questions, I'll share how today will flow and tell you a little bit about FitPros and who I am. So I'm the founder and CEO of FitPros. We are a workplace wellness service provider, and we are hired by benefit teams and learning development departments, brokers, to provide well-being activities that engage a workforce. So visit fitpros.com if you love what you hear today, and we will bring top-notch speakers to your employees virtually now or later when you're back in the office. We can facilitate DEI conversations with your employees and so much more. One final note about FitPros, I have to give major kudos to my teammate, Caitlin Ackerman. She is a well-being manager here at FitPros, and she can help you devise your well-being programs and your DEI strategy. She's certainly done it for us at FitPros. She has taught me so much about this topic, and I am so grateful to her. She is a major reason why we have all these phenomenal speakers with us today. So thank you, Caitlin. All right, moving on. So throughout the discussion, we encourage you to talk amongst each other in the chat box and share ideas. You can root on the speakers when you like what they have to say and so on. So please keep those conversations going. But if you have specific questions that you want a speaker to answer, please put that in the Q&A that you find at the bottom of the screen. That way I can directly ask those questions. Perfect. So I'm going to quickly read a brief bio for each speaker, and then we'll hop into questions. So Rajkumari Neogy is an epigenetic coach and executive consultant focused on the intersection of neurobiology, culture, and empathy in today's business world. She holds a master's degree in transformative leadership development from the California Institute of Integral Studies and is the author of the WIT Factor, Shifting the Workplace Paradigm by Becoming Your Optimal Self. LeRon Barton is a writer from Kansas City, Missouri, who currently lives in San Francisco. He is the author of 2 books, an essayist, whose topics cover racism, mass incarceration, politics, gender, and dating. LeRon has given multiple talks, appeared on TEDx, Al Jazeera, the University of San Francisco, and so much more. He enjoys mentoring African-American youth, teaching creative writing at the San Francisco County Jail, and backpacking around the world. I want to go with you. Very cool. Awesome. We've got Seema Daryanani. Sorry, Seema. I knew I was going to get that wrong, but correct us in just a minute. Seema is a diversity, inclusion, and belonging leader at Anaplan, forming diversity alliances and partnerships, focusing on training to foster a culture of belonging and leading women's interest networks. She has been actively involved in fighting against human trafficking with International Sanctuary as an ambassador and an executive board member for over the past decade, and so much more. Lastly, Cava Menzies is a musician, visual artist, and educator. Cava has served as the OSA's Diversity and Equity Coordinator to help launch their Step It Up program, which creates free arts training classes for marginalized students in Oakland. She is the founder of the brand Color Queen, a platform that highlights her integrated visual art, music, and travel work. In the chat, there is a link to read more about their bios, because these amazing people have done so much more than those quick bios. So please check that out. And let's jump right in. So I'm gonna ask one question to each of these speakers right now. So if you could, we know that allyship is a verb. It's a continuous action, a lifestyle. But why is it so essential that we're all here today? Why do all these people on the line want to hear from you? So speakers, in just one sentence or just a few words, can you tell me what allyship means to you? So we'll start with Rajkumari. You're on mute, honey. You're on mute.
I had prepped my cursor to unmute myself, and then I completely forgot to do that.
that is the sentence of the decade, of the 2020. Is you're on mute.
I'm all ready to go. And I was like, Well, I'm just gonna. I wrote this down. In our pre-call, Seema shared about her daughter saying, you went to a Black Lives Matter protest or something over the weekend, maybe, and you said that your daughter asked you. It's so simple. Why can't people just be nice? Just don't be mean, right? I think allyship is really about calling out that meanness and really inviting that partnership in taking action to create unity and equity in the world.
Love that. Thank you. LeRon, let's go to you. In just one sentence or a few words, what does allyship mean to you?
Thank you for the question, Lindsay. For me, allyship is action. It's a verb. It means that you are willing to sacrifice your place to in society, in this power structure, and where you are to help to ensure equality for all. So.
Love that. Thank you. Seema?
Hi, everyone. So for me, it's really recognizing my own privilege and using that to genuinely support people.
Love that. Cava, will you share with us?
I'm similar to, hello everybody. I'm similar to LeRon in that allyship is an action. And I actually later on want to even discuss the term allyship because that to me even is a little passive. And I think what's needed right now is actually anti-racist work. And I think the word needs to be replaced because allyship to me, I'll go into that later, but just to me, there is an action, it's a posture, it's an attitude, it's an ongoing way of living and embodying the work that needs to be done to dismantle racism. So it's an ongoing practice.
That's so powerful. I mean, those words are so spot on and absolutely powerful. So thank you for that. Awesome. Well, here we go. Rajkumari. You ready? All right. You have worked with many leadership teams at companies such as Google, Facebook, Salesforce, and countless others, working to help teams understand and embed inclusion practices into their daily values. Your work is centered on epigenetics and neurobiology, and you describe exclusion as a physical injury, as a form of trauma. So can you share with us exactly what is going on in an individual's brain when they lack a sense of belonging or directly experience racism?
That's a really big question. I will just kind of invite that there's enough research here that shows that when someone experiences social rejection, the pain centers in our brain light up. And so anytime that one experiences some form of exclusion, it's like being kicked in the shin. Racism is an extreme form of exclusion. The definition of exclusion is someone not feeling welcomed warmly or feeling safe with a group of people, a person, or an environment or a situation. And the opposite of exclusion isn't actually inclusion. The opposite of exclusion is belonging. Belonging is this emotional need that we all have. When in fact, our brains are wired to belong. But how we create belonging is through inclusion. It's the act of creating safety for others. It's the act of warmly welcoming. And the nervous system is always scanning for whether we're about to be excluded. And that can actually have quite a detrimental impact on our health and our well-being. So again, to really pull from Seema's daughter, it is absolutely essential that we learn to be kind to one another. And I just want to deviate a little bit and go to Cava for a moment. Posture and attitude, like those two words, light bulbs and fireworks went off for me, because when I look at the nervous system, there is in fact the posture, the physical posture, but then there's also posturing. and we really need to look at who we are as leaders, who we are as advocates, who we are as accomplices in this very moment. How are we showing up? And the best way that we can know how we're showing up is again to draw from Cava and to really look at our attitude. What are our defense mechanisms? What are our thought patterns? What are our core beliefs that are driving us, our behaviors, and creating the culture that we are experiencing both in our teams and in the workplace?
Thank you so much for that. You're absolutely right. And each of you for being here today. It's just, it says all that. So thank you. Seema, I'd love to transition to you. As a senior manager of diversity, inclusion, and belonging, at global talent at Anaplan, a technology company in San Francisco, you are hands-on doing the internal work within a company across a whole organization. We know that one of the keys to being a strong ally is listening and openness to learning, which can only be done successfully when people feel safe. So can you tell us how Anaplan is creating that psychologically safe spaces to host learning opportunities across your organization?
Absolutely. Can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Great. So look, Lindsay, as you mentioned, the key to being a strong ally is to listen and learn. Currently, that is the phase where we are as a company. We're taking the time to listen to our Black employees, really be uncomfortable, and sit and recognize that we had not created a safe enough space. And that we have to acknowledge that there's a lot of work to be done, similar to other tech companies. During these planning stages, we've provided the employees with lists of resources that each of us can use to educate ourselves and learn about our own privilege to help us be better allies and create the space where we can openly have those discussions, conversations via Slack or webinar, and still try and remain respectful of each other. In parallel, I have the opportunity to work closely with our newly created Black ERG on a speaker series focusing on allyship and race, and looking into where exactly we need further training. Cava, you mentioned anti-racism. We don't want to do just check the box trainings like many companies have done in the past, and we have in terms of unconscious bias, but using that as a base and taking it further, making sure it will be impactful enough to create a more inclusive workplace. I mentioned the newly created Black ERG. We really have done a relaunch of sorts with all our ERG efforts right now for underrepresented populations like Women's Network, LGBTQ+, realizing that, we need to re-strategize and not just say, oh, we have these ERGs, it's great. But ensure we're all well equipped with more resources as leads, and sponsor and leads as leads, and have the proper executive sponsor representation to support our employees and get messy.
That's huge. I mean, it is the top down. So I love that you added in the leadership. It has to be involved. That's amazing. And Seema, I appreciate, as FitPros is realizing we have so much more that we could also do. You helped, you really nailed it of letting us know that we are on the right track as well. And my motto is student for life. And so I love to hear how Anaplan is building that. So thank you for sharing that. Let's move on. LeRon, I'd love to ask you this question. So your voice is unique because you are a Black man in America with lived experiences, both personally and professionally. You speak out about your time in Silicon Valley and have written articles on disguised discrimination. I think sometimes when people think of creating safe spaces, it's sometimes for white leadership or non-Black employees to process. But I really want to emphasize and know, how can we create psychologically and physically safe spaces for Black employees and other marginalized groups to speak out and speak up about the inequities at their company and when they're experiencing firsthand just out in the public? Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I've been a Black man all my life, and one of the one of the issues that I've always seen when it comes to the conversation between Black people and white people, and I'm using this this particular binary because I'm a Black man and I can't speak for people for anyone other than myself, is that the conversation always revolves around, as a Black person, you don't want to come off as too angry. You don't want to be the confrontational Negro, and you are consistently tiptoeing around white people to not make them feel threatened. And white people, they don't want to come off as they don't want to say the wrong thing. I think that as far as creating safe spaces for Black people, one of the reasons why a lot of us do not speak out is fear of reprisal, fear of being labeled as someone who is racist, fear of being labeled as someone who is negative. So many times, Lindsay, we will sort of suppress who we are. I remember there was a podcast that I listened to, and this woman was this Black woman was talking about how she coaches Black men in corporate space, and how sometimes these Black men would tell her, well, I've had to sort of lower my voice. I've had to change my body language. I've had to smile a little bit, because as a Black man, we're always looked at as being threatening. You know, if we're not saying anything, if we're not silent, then we could be viewed as a walking time bomb. You know, I mean, there's always a concern about how we feel. So I would say that if you're going to create a safe space, first off, you have to stop, I guess, asking Black people how you can be a better white person, because that's not our responsibility. I think that as a Black person, we have to live in a society that has been consistently and structurally racist. Now, I love this quote from the great Toni Morrison, where she said, "I can't be the doctor and the patient, so I can't tell you how to treat me and at the same time survive and live within this racist system." I think that there also needs to be space created, and with the acknowledgement that as a white person, you're going to say the wrong thing. Because going back to what Cava said, you know, allyship is a marathon. It's just not a sprint. It's just not something that you're just going to get off the rip. This is something that you're going to constantly work at. And by creating these safe spaces, piggybacking off of what Rajkumari said, you will not have have Black people feeling like that we are excluded. You know, because again, I think she hit the nail right on the head. You know, being excluded from something is like a kick to the stomach. It's a very painful, mental attack.
Thank you, LeRon. And I really appreciate hearing that, because, right when this all ignited, I thought the same. I started reaching out to my Black friends, and I was just like, how can I help you? Like, what can I do? How can I change? And I really have to throw it back to Caitlin. She was like, your friends might not want to educate you. Like, they might not want to, like, go teach yourself. And I was like, oh yeah, duh, go do this. And so, so thank you for that, LeRon. And you said so many powerful things there. So, Rajkumari, you do a lot of work on disruptive diversity framework. And can you tell us a little bit how our listeners across all facets of their life, specifically in the workplace, because that is the majority of people on the line today, how can they create safe spaces for their employees or people all around us, their Black employees that are affected firsthand, who are raising and speaking up their voices, and their white or non-Black employees who want to learn, educate themselves, and support their colleagues. So can you give us a little insight on your framework?
Absolutely. So I think the way in which we create safe spaces in the moment is to notice what voices haven't been invited in yet. And Cava's voice has not yet been invited in. And so I would like to offer my time to Cava and defer her to take on and share whatever she would like to bring her into the conversation.
That was magnificent modeling right there. That I'm so touched by that. Thank you for doing that. And I just really value that. That was a wonderful example of how to be aware and constantly wear your optics. Lindsay, I don't know if this is a time. How do you want to use this time? Because I would like
100%. No, answer that. And then I have the next question going right towards you too. So yeah, if you want to feed off of what she just said, and then I have another question for you.
So maybe I'll just jump into what I'd like to say about professionalism and just how to model that within the workplace. Because you just modeled something so beautifully. So I oftentimes say that professionalism is a mask for racism. And I think many of us grew up thinking that being professional was the most important thing. It's a skill that I work with high schoolers. It's a skill that we teach. If you go to business school or whatever it might be, everybody wants to be a consummate professional. That's the goal. And two things have been really striking for me as we're watching the news, and hopefully everybody is really keeping up on what's happening. But in particular, in the case with George Floyd, and also with Elijah McClain, the young man in Colorado who was also killed by police, the concept of professionalism kept coming up. And so in Elijah McClain's case, when the research was being done on the case, it said that the officer's actions were within policy and consistent with training. So 3 officers killed this young man and deemed that the officer's actions were within policy and consistent with training. And with George Floyd's case, for those of you that watched it, as the officers were laying on him and kneeling on him, you remember the one officer that was standing guard and kind of keeping everyone at bay. And there was a moment when an EMT stepped in and she was trying to get them to check his vitals. And he turned to her and he said, she, I think, said some profanity to him. And she said, "That's very unprofessional of you." And so I've been thinking a lot about professionalism and what do we call professionalism and where does that come from? Our notion of what is professional and what is not. I think when you look at the definition of professionalism, it's the competence or skill expected of a professional. And I think the 2 words that are really critical in that are competence and skill, because what's the framework for competence? Who decides what competence looks like? And there's a whole structural piece embedded in that. There's white normative versions of competence that are reinforced through media, that are reinforced everywhere we go about what competence looks like. And then skill is also something that is white normative in terms of what's your education, what's your life experience, what's your background. So I think a lot about that. And then I think about how that plays out within the context of institutions and corporations. How do we uphold those systems? So for me, similar to what LeRon was beginning to talk about, was dress code, speech pattern expected, speed of your work. How do you manage your time? What's your style of working? Notions of perfectionism, how we manage people, what level of emotionality is appropriate when we're communicating, what is a professional name? You know, we've heard all those stories about people's resumes and like LeRon, would you get hired if your name was Joe Barton versus LeRon Barton? There's all these just professional norms that affect the hiring and firing process. And it also affects pay scale. It affects your ability to ascend within an institution who has leadership roles. All of those things feed in. So, and I'm jumping ahead, Lindsay. I hope it's okay.
No, that's perfect. And I actually want to dive a little bit. I want to ask you one more question, if that's okay. And I mean, this is on that same topic because, you know, in a recent video, you shared that sometimes in these leadership positions, in this professional, you know, higher up positions, you felt disenchanted because the role often asks you to go against your values and go with the program, and you do not agree with this. Right. So these challenges may be very similar with many of our listeners on the line today, because, you know, sadly, their executive team might not be raising a voice, but people inside the workplace do. They do want to share their voice. They do want to be part of the movement. So can you also share how you suggest people speak out against injustice in the workplace and changing the lens on professionalism?
Absolutely. I think it's scary to speak out. Like, I just want to acknowledge that, especially when you are in an like administrative leadership position. Oftentimes you feel like there's sort of like that third wall, or I forget what it's called, but basically where you are sort of upholding the norm of the leadership. And there's a responsibility that goes with that to choose your words carefully, to make sure that you're upholding systems that you've all agreed upon. So it takes a level of bravery and courage to step outside of that. I think some suggestions, some tangible suggestions, that one thing would be that every institution, corporation, organization needs a really strong feedback loop, so that it's not up to one individual just to be speaking on the things that are happening. There needs to be a place and a space designated within the organization where people can be honest without repercussions. And it needs to be blatantly stated that honesty without repercussions is one of our core values as an institution, and that we seek regular feedback. We love to be self-reflective as an institution. So we welcome it. Here's when you're going to do it. It's quarterly. It's maybe there's a point person within the organization that you can go to. So strong feedback loop with multiple inputs from stakeholders. The other thing I would say, and I think Seema, you touched on this, is that sometimes I'm sure many companies send out surveys. How are we doing? Does this feel culturally competent? Whatever it might be. But I think it's more important to actually ask specific demographic. Like, this survey is just for Black people in our company, or this is just for POC folks. Because sometimes getting the multiple inputs, there's a fear around being honest and losing your job. I would also say just optics. This is something that I see coming up all the time. When you begin to do the work of seeing systemic racism, like, I'm wearing my glasses, to me, becoming an ally is like putting on glasses permanently, where you look at everything through the lens of optics. So every decision, every piece of paper that goes out to the company, every email, every meeting in which somebody is speaking and somebody is listening, like what you did, Raj, was looking at the optics of this moment and saying, was everybody's voice represented? And that you're wearing those glasses where you're just consistently looking at that. So just doing that. And then the last thing I would just say is actually two more, just creating core values as a staff. And letting your employees and leadership co-create those. What does professionalism mean and look like to us in our workplace? And let's co-create this. And then the last thing is just be really transparent as a company or an organization about the fact that we are working on equity, and we know we're not perfect at it. And we're going to be a little messy, as Seema said. We're going to show you our process. And we want you to actively know that we are trying and we're ready to just work and work and work and work. So it's not something that can be a closed door conversation or a policy that says we're trying to be equitable. This is just full transparency that it's a work in progress.
That's huge. And Seema, I'm going to turn it to you in just a moment, because Cava just mentioned so much about internally in the workplace, and that's your role. Thank you, Cava.
Mm-hmm, sure.
LeRon, I want to turn it back to you real quick. You are a culture disruptor. I mean, that's what you do. You speak out, and I love, and people, I highly recommend watch his TED Talk. It moved me so much. So LeRon, can you tell us what that looks like? What does it look like, and why is it essential to be a culture disruptor in the unity of allyship?
Sure. Well, I think that it's imperative because of the status quo today. You know, going back to what I mentioned before, you know, companies like Google and Facebook have 2 to 3% Black people. That's not by accident, right? I mean, that's not because Black people are not qualified. That's not because we can't code or that we're not good engineers. No, it's due to a couple reasons. For one, it would be due to social capital. It's due to the this inherent view that we're not as intelligent, and it's just there's not a lot of outreach. So for me, I believe that if we want to have any change, we have to be what I would like to call an ethical troublemaker. And what that means is someone that's going to come in and that's going to raise these very uncomfortable questions. Someone that's going to come in and that's just going to point out, okay, well, this seems like systemic racism. You know, why is it that in a city like San Francisco, which Black men have an unemployment rate of 53%? Why is that? Why is that? Tech is a very uncomfortable area for women. So people need to be brave, and that's easier said than done. You know, Cava mentioned that when you speak out, it can be dangerous, and you know that, and you know that's true. But I think that being a Black person, it's all about going against the grain. It's all about, you know, being the ethical troublemaker. Because Lindsay, what I want to do is that I want to make it easier for the people that are coming behind me. You know, I want to make the road a bit more simpler so that someone can get a job at Google, so that someone can get a job at Facebook, hopefully by me speaking out and by writing about these subjects, and about giving these talks that can illuminate a very troubling issue we have, which is the fact that diversity needs to be just uprooted, and it needs to be changed into what Seema said, belonging. You know, people need to know that when they come to these companies, that when they are a part of these organizations, they not only feel like they belong, but if there is an issue, they can raise it, and they're not going to be fired, or they're not going to be labeled, or they're not going to be bullied. And that is the reason why people don't speak up. So for me, I just, it's bigger than LeRon Barton. You know, it's for Rajkumari, it's for Seema, it's for Cava, it's for Lindsay, it's for all the folks that want to make something of themselves, that maybe feel like that we don't. I mean, like the great Malcolm X, he in his book, he said that he wanted to be a lawyer, but there was a teacher early in his life that told him he couldn't be a lawyer. You know, he needed to be a carpenter because he was Black. He talked about West Indian Archie, how he was a brilliant mathematician, but couldn't do that because racism wouldn't allow him to be a teacher. So discrimination and racism is more than just a slur. It's more than just me being incarcerated. It's also me not being able to live the life that I want to live. So that's what I think a culture disruptor needs to do, is to just shake things up so that everyone else can have an easier time being who they want to be.
Thank you, LeRon. You made me like pull out my notebook real quick, and I'm like, I'll write it down. Thank you so much for that. You said so many things, so many gems that really stuck out. And, you know, I think other people coming up behind us, my husband and I have been talking a lot about kids, and about how we want our kids to look at the world with equity, and so like I really appreciate hearing you say that. It's like it's not just the people around us right now, it's the next generations, and so that is so powerful. And then also you made so many mentions about, you know, the being a disruptor, and I will, you know, give credit again to Caitlin. She really ignited the DEI efforts within FitPros, and so FitPros has a program we call Wellness Warrior, and so that is someone within a company that is the voice, that is an advocate for driving programs. And so you know, I think that you made a really good point on, I think that companies should find those people within their company that have a voice, that want to share. So really embrace and empower them to build a community within their company and share that voice. So thank you, LeRon, for really nailing that. And so this is a great transition back to Seema. Cava just said so many powerful things about being inside of a company and making a difference. And so Seema, I'd love to turn it back to you. And can you share with us what you have already or you're planning to implement across Anaplan, and what do you recommend for companies to take their allyship to the next level, to be an anti-racist company, to really take that stance and not be ashamed to say that? How can they be accomplices in the mission of truly creating a culture of inclusion and belonging?
Absolutely. And Lindsay, I'm going to be really transparent for a moment and share that we went back and forth on this question, because I can't truly sit here in good conscience and say that we have done a great job as a company and nailed it. We have not, and many other tech companies have not. I just want to be clear in saying that. I think in order for us to retain any talent or hire anyone further, we really need to make sure that we have more empathy and compassion across all levels. Again, back to the executive level too. Really take the time to listen to people's experiences of being excluded, like Rajkumari mentioned, like Cava mentioned, in or outside the workplace. Learn how we can create a better environment in which exclusion happens less and less. I've had the wonderful opportunity of working closely with Rajkumari on learning so much about how I've dealt with my own exclusion and how that impacts your life and your health and your physical and mental health. Focusing on supporting our employees' mental health first, support them as human beings, recognize them as human beings. Cava, when I first got on the call, I apologized for whatever noise you're going to hear in the background. I seem to do that pretty much every conversation I have. I have 2 little girls. They're not here right now. I made sure of that just so that, I wouldn't have any noise in the background, but I do have the little dog, and Cava's like, why we need to recognize what you have at home, and the first step is not to apologize for that. And that's true. The pandemic and racial injustice has taught us that all of us are currently working under extreme circumstances. On a company level, we all need to be more open at having these very uncomfortable conversations and recognizing and realizing there's a lot to fix. We will mess up. We need to acknowledge that, learn from it, and keep changing. I want to focus for a minute on making mistakes. We'll make them. I made one a few weeks ago. I'd like to share it. I thought it would help work with the proper teams on communication and education of Juneteenth. When I went to our Black ERG leads, I said, I'm gonna do this for you. I'm gonna take the burden off of you and help educate our company on this. And they said, wait, we want to do that. And I said, but I wanted to take the burden off of you. I wanted to help you. And I thought I would do it, but I'd bring it to you for review. I of course wouldn't do anything without having you, look at it. And one of our leads, Danielle, said to me, in this case, it's going to be a delicate dance between what we do from inception versus what we review. So while I appreciate you, Seema, wanting to take the burden off of us, this would be an example of where we want to drive. I felt horrible. I thought, of course, how did I not know that? As a person who's felt excluded, how did I not know that I needed to ask that question? What Danielle said to me resonated, and now whatever I'm responsible for, I make sure I communicate to the RG and ask the question, how involved do you want to be? I'm here for support. I can be as little or as deeply involved as you want. I think that communication itself is key. Beyond that, my hope for Anaplan and other tech companies is that this never stops. Like Cava mentioned, this movement is not something to be forgotten in a few months, years. If we come together, our voices are stronger and louder, and we need executives to use their privilege to help us get there too. This can't be the agenda solely of the Office of Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging. It has to be embedded in everyone's role. I feel people should be reviewed and compensated based on how strong of an ally they are. In my perfect world, that would be the case.
Love that. Wow. So many great things there. And you're absolutely right. Cava really set the tone for the meeting. She was just like, no, be you. Like, that just made me sit back in my chair. I was like, yeah, it's all right. My cat might jump in front of my face in just a second. So thank you for that. I really want to open it up to everyone. And maybe Rajkumari, if you want to kick it off, because we haven't heard from you in a minute, to build off of that. Seema just said so many great things, or of anything else that that's come up for you.
I don't know what else to say. I guess I need a question, but for the first time in a long time, I feel at a loss for words.
That was, yeah, Cava, did you want to join?
I love Seema. Just so many things that you said were resonant. Again, you just modeled it, is being vulnerable, talking about the value of making a mistake, and then even sharing your process, like what your intention was, but then your willingness to receive the feedback, and then shifting your approach moving forward. To me, those are the 3 steps that really create a healthy working environment. Is just that notion that we're not going to get it right. And you're a woman of color, and thinking that, you know, you have good intent. It's like we're all works in progress. And so that willingness to receive that feedback again, and just tread lightly, and thoughtfully, just that really resonated with me. And just, we live in a culture of perfectionism, all of us do. So the notion of embracing mistakes and then trying at it again is really powerful.
Thank you for that. And we just got a question for LeRon, specifically. LeRon, Dina asked, what do you feel is the role of white social justice educators, trainers in this movement?
That's a really good question. So in America and in the world, white people have an innate credibility that I will never have. It's just historically, people will listen to a white person before they listen to me or Cava or Rajkumari or Seema. I think that the responsibility for the white social justice leader is to continuously educate and work with and motivate white people. You know, Black people and other non-white people, we have been living we've been living these experiences our entire life. So there doesn't need to be any dialogue from us. There's a lot of white people today in 2020, you know, due to the George Floyd lynching and due to the uprising, that want to be a part of it, that want to hashtag get in the game. And so I think it's important for you to use your credibility, to use your familiarity with white people. I mean, a lot of white people, they may have questions. They may want to do something, but they don't know how. And so that is your responsibility. You know, your responsibility is to take them and guide them by the hand and to explain to them. You know, it's just like what, I love what Seema said about her owning up to her mistake. It's a white ally. Their responsibility is to tell them, hey, you know what? These questions, these things that you want to say to LeRon, why don't we give him a break? Why don't we not burden Cava? And why don't you say those to me? So that would be the first thing.
You know, I'd like to jump in here and just talk a little bit about, I think Cava, you talked about making an impact, being impactful. I think that's the word that you used. I think for me, how we talk about this conversation, especially for white folks and people who are just beginning their journey, is to really invite discomfort as a point of growth and an opportunity to really reflect inwardly as to what is driving that loyalty to discomfort. If I don't want to have a conversation with you about a certain topic, why? And I think there's an opportunity in corporate America and organizations, you know, kind of worldwide. How do we start to invite the topic of feelings into the conversations? Because at the end of the day, we are all humans, at least for right now, maybe not in the very near future. We will become transhuman. That's fine. But for the moment, we are a walking pharmacy of neurochemical synapses. Every emotion generates a neurochemical. Every feeling generates a neurochemical. Every need or unmet need generates a neurochemical. And what we need to bring to the table right now, urgently in this conversation of justice, inclusion, and belonging, is to invite the discomfort of talking about who we are as a human being, where we've come from, the stories that have shaped us, and the beliefs that we hold that are either impeding us or catapulting us forward.
Thank you. And Katie Ryan came in with a question that really is spot on with what you just said. And she asked how to help empower others to continue to do the work themselves, unpacking their own stuff, but not waiting until they're ready to start speaking up and out, as no one ever feels ready to be uncomfortable about these conversations about racism. So I don't know if anybody has anything they wanted to kind of say to address like the don't wait, just do it.
I would love to jump in because
Nope, there we go.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I think the pressure of everybody jumping in at the same time, if you haven't done the research and you haven't sat with and digested the scope of what we're talking about, to ask everybody to jump in, it won't even serve our ultimate goal. To me, the way to do it, again, is to use that word modeling. And I'll use, I'm white and black. My mother is white. My father is black. At the moment, my mother is stepping up to the plate within her community. She lives in a predominantly white neighborhood, has predominantly white friends, and she's very much saturated in white culture. She is stepping up and is my ally, where I will feed her materials, and she is modeling things for her community and her friend group and our family, so that the family is then following behind and able to sort of see the steps that she laid out. So to me, the most impactful step that you can make as a white ally is to do the work yourself, show by example. And I think that is an invitation. It's an unspoken invitation for people to follow that kind of work, and then make yourself available for conversations. That's the other thing, is people need processing time. What you were talking about, Rajkumari, is the emotionality of this experience and the emotionality of this kind of uncomfortable growth. And so where I work, we have spaces. We have affinity groups. We have a White Allies affinity group. We have a POC faculty and staff group, and we have to process what we're going through in those spaces. And so allowing for space to have those conversations is important. But I don't think anybody should be forced to speak out before they've had time to digest and process and know how they want to actually use their voice for change.
Thank you for that, Cava. And speaking personally, as a business founder, when people were starting to publish their when CEOs were starting to publish all their responses to this, someone on my team had said like, oh, we got to get this out. We got to get this out immediately. And I was like, I need to sit back. I need to sit back and educate myself. I need to like absorb how I actually feel about this. And it took me a week to almost 10 days until I posted like, this is how I feel. And this is how FitPro stands as a company. And so I appreciate hearing you say that.
May I just add one other thing, because there is the other side of that, which is silence. And that has been also really hurtful. So I think that was the root of the question, is like, how do we address white silence? And then how do we also say something? The example that you use, Lindsay, is great. Like, I think a recommendation would be, if you're posting on your Facebook or your IG or whatever it is, or wherever you post your company stuff, just to say, I'm taking these matters really seriously. I don't want to jump to conclusions and post something wrong, but I want you to know that I'm deep in thought about the injustices that I'm seeing, and I will have a more formalized statement. It's again, that transparency that says, I'm speaking on this. I don't have the right words yet, but I'm willing to put a placeholder just so you know I've prioritized this, and then I'll follow up with the words that I really want to say. And that to me is addressing the silence, and it's addressing being consistent.
Absolutely. 100%. Absolutely.
That's huge. You're absolutely right. Absolutely right. It allows that space to say like, I care about this. I care about this deeply, but I need to process. So I appreciate that for sure. Awesome. Well, I'm going to hop back to some other questions, and Cava, I'm going to throw this one right back at you. We really want our listeners to leave today with some tangible next steps that they can take with them both personally and professionally. And you are a community builder. You work with youth and families, providing outlets for expression. You curate forums for mixed race, Black and white people about the inner tensions that they might feel. You create opportunities for white people to learn and to take appropriate steps to dismantle racism. Can you share with us how we can remain in this space today, tomorrow, and as long as we need? And what are some actionable steps that are needed for people, specifically non-Black people, to create sustainable change across our systems? Very big question for you.
It's so big and so great. And just the question in and of itself is important. I don't have all the answers, but I do have some ideas. So when I initially said that I don't love the word ally and that I love the word anti-racist, and that's a new term that I'm so glad we're always looking for the language that addresses where the need is. And we all kind of talked about the need for actionable steps. And to me, that anti-racism is number one, doing the personal work. I love it because it speaks to first you self-examining, am I racist? What are my racist tendencies, or what are the things that implicit bias that I maybe have embedded within me? And then actively also looking in the world around me and how does that reflect it? In terms of tangible things to do, every day commit to doing some research. That would be my first thing. If you are a non-POC person, read something, dedicate 15 minutes of your day minimally, that I'm going to read an article, I'm going to learn about this particular case. This morning, for me, it was the Elijah McClain thing. His story is actually just going in or watching a documentary or watching a YouTube, just something just to gradually inform you day by day. I think that proactive kind of research is critical to just understanding the scope of what's going on. I think other ways to show up in an ongoing way is, I love to say, don't center yourself in the conversation, knowing when to step up and step back. And so knowing when it's your time to process and discuss, and then when it's your time to fall back and listen. That's a really great strategy and just a great human quality in general. Like, I feel like I've overtalked in this conversation, so I'm already questioning my step up, step back. Another important thing is just knowing your sphere of influence and using your platform. We live in a social media era and age. We live in a digital age. All of us have spheres of influence, both personally and then within our professional career. And so looking at your sphere of influence and thinking about, where do I actually want to enter to do this work? For me, I'm an educator. I have youth and families. So I know that that is the point that I can make an impact with this work. For other people, it might be your professional associations or whatever it might be, but then really using your platform to dismantle things. The other thing is that the last thing I would add is that speak to your families, especially I'm speaking specifically to white folks. Speak to your families, speak to your friends, speak to your community. You have to do the personal work. This can't be like an outward, this is not just like a political, social movement that you get to do outside and then come home and engage in family activities that maybe don't support that work. It's an inside out job. You have to do the work initially with your circle, and then that should be magnified outside. And then just be brave. It's hard. This is hard, exhausting, terrifying, sickening, wonderful, magnificent work.
I just want to jump in here. I totally agree with you. And in the last 3 weeks, I have been beyond exhausted, and I have incorporated 2-hour naps into my day because I cannot survive the day without resting. And so I invite those of you who can do some time blocking on your calendar for self-care to really take that. And I can't believe I just announced that publicly to the world, to my clients, that I nap during the day. But anyway, getting off mute now.
I totally think like that. That taking some time to yourself is really important. Cava and I, we discussed just the mental below black from the killings of George Floyd, as well as Breonna Taylor, as well as Ahmaud Arbery. You have to give yourself time to just rest, and sometimes turn off social media, shutting down your computer. I mean, unfortunately we live in a system where these things are going to keep happening, but just don't run yourself ragged. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Thank you. Gosh, we have so many amazing questions coming in right now. One of which is, how can people find you guys on social media? So if each of you panelists will type that into the chat, that would be wonderful. And we'll have a slide at the end here to find them on LinkedIn as well. I want to quickly, we only have a few minutes left, and I want to turn it back to Seema real quick. Seema, you have children, as you mentioned, and I'm really curious, how do you suggest for our next generations, how do you suggest that we carry this message from what everybody said today and what we're learning and onto them?
Absolutely. So, I started talking to them about race from a really young age. I wanted them to recognize their skin color is different from others. And while they're accepted here in our little bubble, they're going to be in a place one day that they won't be welcome. Seeing that generation gives me hope. They've seen me very emotional over the last few weeks and have, like Rajkumari mentioned, the drain. So I decided to go to their class and talk to them about, what the Black Lives Movement and how to be activists and, how they can acknowledge their own privilege and encourage them to use that privilege, even though they're marginalized and they're brown and they're female, but turn that light away right now from themselves and shine that light towards the voices of the unheard. Stand up for their friends, say something when they see someone being treated unfairly. Don't be colorblind. Kids we shelter them sometimes. We raise them like that. We shouldn't. I share struggles marginalized groups go through over the past few months, focusing more so on teaching them about what the Black community has endured. I shared with them that George Floyd was murdered, not that he died, by the police. And I taught them about Juneteenth. We went to the family protest, like I mentioned. They look at me with these eyes and say, this isn't okay, this isn't fair. I'm sorry. They're appalled. And those extreme reactions make me know that when I'm not here, they're gonna continue to fight.
Seema, you're amazing. I see you. I stand in solidarity with you. I adore you. Thank you for sharing from your heart. Thank you for shining your light for everyone.
Thank you for that. I don't have the words, so I'll give some closing remarks in just a moment, but I do want to ask the presenters here, do you have any last things you'd like to share with the audience today?
Hashtag do your work.
Allyship is marathon, don't stop trying, don't stop believing, but it's, but you just have to just keep going. And if I can impart something, remember, impact trumps intent, right? And it's something that I learned last year that I really try to be focused on. Just because you may mean well, similar to what Seema shared, right? Like, she meant well, but it's like Black folks were like, oh, we got that here. So just remember, it's a marathon, not a sprint.
I would add that it's just powerful that you're all here. When I'm looking at the number of participants, showing up is the first step. And maybe for many of you, this has been something you already have been showing up for. And for some of you, maybe this is the first time. I just want to acknowledge your attention to these issues and being present for it. And then, as LeRon said, the marathon piece is just remember, like, this talk is important and we only shared an hour together. So the ongoing, consistent curiosity and work is critical.
I just want to thank Cava and LeRon, of course Seema, but I know you personally. So Cava and LeRon, I have learned so much from you today, and it has been very humbling to be in your presence. Cava, I want to do work with you. I want to do projects with you. LeRon, I want to hear you talk way more. I want to hear your voice way more. I want you to hold a mic and 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365
That'll
days.
be scary. It's a lot of people. I don't know this guy.
I just thank you too so much. And of course, Seema, as always, your heart. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you to Caitlin, Lindsay. You mentioned thanks for inviting us and doing this panel and recognizing that it needed to be done.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you guys so very much. Thank you everyone for tuning in today. Panelists, from the bottom of my heart, I have the utmost, excuse me, gratitude that you were willing to show up, be vulnerable with us today. It means so much. And for everyone tuning in today, if you would like to get in touch with these speakers, they put it in the chat, and then there's a slide up right now where you can find their contact information. They're all such powerful change makers in the space. Fit Pros would be thrilled to bring them into your workplace. So please connect with us at hello@fitpros or fitpros.com. And gosh, I'm so choked up. Thank you guys so much. Again, I'm Lindsay Johnson, founder and CEO of Fit Pros. And thank you everyone, and have a blessed day.